This is the plaintiff, Camarilla. She says she signed a lease for an apartment the defendant was renting. And when it came time to move in, there was no stove or refrigerator in the kitchen. When she asked the defendant where they were, he told her the place didn't come with a stove or refrigerator. Huh? Needless to say, she never moved in. He refuses to refund her money, so she's suing for the $330 she's owed. This is the defendant, Warren. He says he made it quite clear the tenant supplies the fridge and the stove. Once she realized she was going to have to pony up those appliances, she asked to be let out of her lease, and he agreed. The plaintiff is lucky he returned any of her money because the woman cost him money and also prevented him from signing a lease with 4 other prospective tenants. Oh, her? Ha! He's accused of lousy landlording.
All parties, please raise your right hands.
Welcome back to the People's Court. Next case in the docket, the plaintiff signed an apartment lease. When it came time to move in, no stove, no fridge. But the defendant says that was her problem. It's the case of going a manna to a manna.
Thank you, Douglas. Okay, both of you have asked that we not mention your last names. Camarilla, you are suing Warren for $330, the balance of a security deposit that you say he owes you and refuses to pay, correct?
Correct.
What happened?
I went to go see an apartment the end of July. I was apartment hunting. I found this apartment. He told me I looked around and it only had a stackable washer and dryer. So because of that, I told him I can't take the apartment because I have a washer and dryer that is side by side. He said, well, Kay, if you're serious, I told him he could call me Kay. He said, Kay, if you're serious about taking the apartment, I will make the arrangements for you. I said,
meaning what, the plumbing arrangements for the
meaning
hookup?
he will move the dryer plug so that it could be side by side.
And you can bring your own in.
Correct. So I brought him my security deposit on August 3rd. As I gave him my security deposit and I'm signing the lease, he informs me as soon as I put the T across my last name that he will be moving to Minnesota or something like that in about 6 months. And I'll be getting a new landlord because he's going to sell the apartment. I explained to him that I took the apartment because I felt like you were a nice guy and I built my relationship with you. Furthermore, going on in the middle of August, he calls me and he says, hey, Kay, I'm doing the...
You're supposed to move in when?
September 1st. But he told me that he's going to visit Minnesota before September 1st. So I would be in the apartment before September 1st. So I said, that's great because my kids start school August 27th. So if I could get in there before the kids start school, that would be great. So he said, okay, I'm going to work that out for you. The middle of August, I'm trying to keep contact with him throughout the whole month. The middle of August, he calls me and he says, hey, Kay, the plumber or the electrician for the dryer is going to cost me more than I intended. I thought it was going to be about $50 to $100, but in actuality, the guy's charging me $300. He said, can you go half with me? So I told him I'm not going to go half. He doesn't have to go through the problem or the struggle. Just return my security deposit. He said, okay, I really want you as a tenant, so I'll do whatever I have to do. I'm going to just do it. I said, no, it's okay, Warren. Just give me back my security deposit. He said, come look at the apartment and come see what I've done with the place so far. I go to the apartment.
Now, at this point, you had given him how much?
I gave him a money order of $875 for the security deposit.
Have you signed a lease?
On August 3rd when I gave him
You did?
Yes.
Okay. And does anybody have the lease?
Yes.
Okay. And so you asked for your money back. He says no, right?
In the middle of August, he was like, well, come look at what I've done with the place. So I go over there and I look at the apartment and there was no lights. There was nothing in the apartment when I initially went to see it in July. Nothing. The floors weren't done.
Yeah, but you knew that. So now it's when in August that you go see the apartment?
This is mid-August. It had to be like August 15th. And the lights that he chose to put in were these big light bulbs with one long string in every room. To me, that was tacky. The floors were done, but the paint from the floors were up on the walls. He's like, okay, I gotta still do the walls and everything. The kitchen was still full of
Wait, what do you mean the paint from the floors was still on the wall? I don't know what you're saying.
Whatever they used to paint the floors is splashed up on the walls, the brown. So it was, a dark wood color, but it was on the walls now. So he's like, oh, I still have to clean up the walls and everything. The kitchen was still full of tools. And so I can see that they're still working on it, but it wasn't, looking fantastic. But at the same time, like I explained to him, I like the apartment and I really wanted to get into an apartment so that my kids could be settled before the first day of school. That was my main focus. And I'm waiting a month for this. So now we're on August 25th or whatever. Now it's August 24th, correction. It's a Saturday. I call him because I haven't heard from him. And I called him and I said, Warren, what's going on with the apartment? Is it done? He said, okay, everything's done. I said, everything's done? Like the lights are fixed, the stove, the fridge? He said, yeah, the lights are in there, but Kay, there's no stove and there's no fridge. I said, Warren, what do you mean? He was like, oh, I told you it was cold flat. I said, now you're trying to play my intelligence.
Wait a minute. There's a lease. Does the lease say she has to bring a stove and a fridge?
Doesn't say that.
So why would a tenant expect that you're not going to supply the stove and the fridge?
So if the lease says nothing about it, does a tenant have a right to a stove and a fridge?
No, not at all. They searched for that apartment. They looked through the fine print.
Well, there was no fine print. That's the thing. No fine print. Is a tenant entitled to a stove and a fridge?
Yeah, it's basic rights, basic needs.
Basic rights?
I guess so, yeah.
Oh, that was definitive going inside the courtroom.
She came and she saw the apartment and it was empty, and that's what she wanted.
Yeah, but you were working on the apartment and you would say, come and see the work I've done. There were all kinds of, why would she not think that you were going to supply a stove and a fridge? How are you even allowed to not supply a stove and a fridge?
Well, my policy is
Don't you have to have, in Connecticut, don't you have to have like the CO each time you rent to somebody?
No, it's not required.
Do you have a CO to rent this? Is this your basement? What is this? Right
It's an apartment building, a three-family apartment.
Three-family apartment. Do you live there?
No.
Okay. And do you have, I don't know if the CO is what they call it.
No, that's when you have a private home. You get a certificate of occupancy.
What do you do when you have an apartment? How do they know you're not renting out apartments without stoves and fridge?
Well, I have most of my tenants are Section 8.
So who cares?
Well, they come in and they inspect the apartment.
That's right. So when the government's not breathing down your throat and inspecting the apartment, how do we know that you're just following the law and providing these things anyway? Like, what is? I'm not.
No, because they don't require the landlord to have stove and refrigerator.
Here's what we've got. She ends up, and you end up saying, forget it. I'm not buying a stove and a fridge for your apartment.
Correct.
That I then have to take with me to every apartment that I go to or lose.
Correct.
All right. You then return a portion of the money, but not all of it. And how did you calculate what to return and what not?
Well, I just deducted the cost for the electrical work.
So you mean the electrical work for, I guess it was electrical, not plumbing?
Move the plug
for the
from
washer
one wall
dryer?
to the other.
The washer dryer hookup is what you...
Exactly.
Okay. So that's what you held back, the washer dryer hookup that you spent for her. But in order to be able to hold anything back, you have to be able to prove to me that she is on notice of something very strange for most tenants, which is, hey, you got a stove and a fridge in your pocket, that she's the guy who has to provide the stove and the fridge. If it's not in your 7-page lease, tell me how is it that you're going to prove that because she's telling me she was shocked when she heard you say that. So how are you going to prove that you told her that? Do you have a text? Do you have an email? Do you have a tape phone call? Do you have a witness? How are you going to prove that?
Well, when she came in to see the apartment was empty.
That's it? That's how you're going to prove it?
I do not furnish my
That is how you're going to prove it. That's it.
That's all I have.
You figured she'd assume that you're providing lights, you're fixing lights, but she doesn't need to assume that she's going to finish the floors just because the floors looked that way when she saw it. She doesn't need to assume she's going to put in light fixtures even though there were no light fixtures when she saw it. But she's to assume she needs to put in a stove and a fridge. Verdict for the plaintiff in the amount of $330. That's my judgment. Don't be ridiculous.
Thank you.
Next time, I suggest you put it in a lease.
The defendant was still talking as the judge was leaving the bench after that decision. What is it that you had to say at the end there?
Well, I was going to tell her that I told her that I was going to throw in the refrigerator and the stove at the end, and she said she just didn't want it again.
That's great. Why don't you put the stuff in writing?
Next time I'll do that.
Right. All right, so step on in here. Are you satisfied what just took place in court?
Yes, I'm glad that they seen where I was coming from, and everyone sees that that is nonsense, that you can't just tell people at the end 2 days before, no fridge and stove. It's crazy.
Yeah. Harvey?
Here's the thing, when you have a written lease, oral side deals are ridiculous because the other person's gonna say, I didn't agree. If it's important enough to put in writing, put the amendments in writing too.